You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello. Please let me see your ticket stubs for the double-edged double bill. This week, Martin Scorsese presents Gangs of Shutter Island. Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariani will come to the table to discuss the randomly selected yin and yang of a double feature. Then both will have to pick a number between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for the next episode. One will have 2 good movies, the other 2 bad ones. Let the chaos begin. I am Adam Thomas, and are you talking to me?
Well, I am Thomas Mariani, and I am talking to you because I am a duly appointed federal marshal, and I want to know what happened to my partner. What happened?
So you sound like Joe Quimby. Mayor
You better tell me what happened to him, Bo Quimby. As you could tell from our great banter here at the beginning, we have a new episode of the Double-Edged Double Bill, where at the end of our previous episode, we picked a good and a bad feature related to a topic that we are doing. Usually it's related to something that's current and in the realm of film, and obviously a big current thing. The day after, actually, we're releasing this particular episode, The Irishman, a Martin Scorsese movie, is dropping on Netflix, which is weird to say, given how much that dude loves film in general, that he's willingly letting Netflix kind of dump his movie briefly into theaters and then out onto a streaming platform.
The new Martin Scorsese movie, starring De Niro, Pacino, and Pesci, is going very, very limited release and then streaming. That is fucking insane. That entire sentence I just said sounds like a made-up alternate reality.
That's true, because I think it's interesting since Martin Scorsese, obviously, one of the preliminary directors still around, one of the few guys from like that new age of Hollywood from like the 70s, which if you don't know, in the 70s after the studio systems kind of collapsed, a bunch of directors came in and sort of evolved what the idea of modern Hollywood cinema would be at that time. People like Francis Ford Coppola, or later on Spielberg and George Lucas, and Martin Scorsese just kind of came in and made these sort of more grounded examples of film that after the 60s had a deluge of like really bad big studio pictures that nobody cared about. People were more interested in this grime and realism, and obviously Scorsese was a big example of that. And I think he's one of the few people from that time that is still consistently making very good films, at the very least.
Yeah, out of all those guys, he's at least got the least amount of duds, I would say, in his filmography, especially in his later years. Spielberg's sort of kind of like, crapping shit out. And George Lucas, well.
He's not making movies anymore, honestly.
Well, that's probably for the best.
And Coppola occasionally makes movies, but they're just like random things that nobody sees.
Yeah, which is completely odd to me that, much like the sentence I said earlier, that Francis Ford Coppola movies just completely fly under the radar.
I mean, I get that now because, like, despite how big he was in the 70s, like, after American Zoetrope kind of, like, fell under with The One from the Heart, he was making a lot of movies that were either, like, surprising successes or completely fell under the radar and no one cared. Like, that's been consistent for him for a couple of decades at this point.
That's just crazy, though. I mean, the guy created, masterpieces.
Well, we should definitely do a Francis Ford Coppola episode in the future, but that's not the discussion for now, because
we're what if I decided it is? What if I decide that
all right,
is?
What 2 films are we doing then for Francis Ford Coppola?
We will do The Godfather.
Okay, yeah, a pretty good one, yeah.
And The Godfather 3.
Oh, man, I feel like there's something missing in between.
Right.
Well, but to get back to Scorsese, Adam, when was the first time you watched a Scorsese movie? Do you remember what Scorsese movie you watched first? And where was the first time you kind of became aware of him as a director?
I believe the first Scorsese movie I saw was Goodfellas, just because my dad really, really loved that movie. And, again, another movie that he let me watch way, way too young. But because my dad was such a huge fan of it and knew who Scorsese was and, really liked Taxi Driver and Mean Streets, so I was aware of Martin Scorsese as a director basically right off the bat from Goodfellas on. Casino, I'd say it was probably when I really noticed his style and things like that in relation to Goodfellas. Because then it might have been pre-Casino, but definitely after Casino is when I first saw Mean Streets. but I think Taxi Driver might have been in between the two. Yeah, like I said, ever since I first saw Goodfellas, like I just absolutely loved it. And I want to say Goodfellas might be the reason that I became such a big movie fan, as in how it's shot and who directed it and everything like that. Before it was just mindless entertainment. I think Goodfellas is the first movie that really made me sort of appreciate the craft of movie making.
Yeah, I would say the first one I saw was Goodfellas too, though that was much more intentional from my father, given, if you couldn't tell from my very Italian-sounding last name, he was a big Scorsese fan, and he introduced me to Scorsese as a person. I think especially because we had watched the Godfather movies, the first two, and he never did tell me about Godfather 3. I found out about that on my own. That was something he just wanted to shield from me as a child.
Oh, that's a good dad. That is a good dad.
I was just like, I didn't know there's a third one. No son of mine will watch the Godfather 3.
Here's a third Godfather movie? No!
It's like I imagine our generation treats the Star Wars prequels. Just in some way, they're just like, there were three other ones. Like, no.
I could say absolutely no.
Not in my house. You get out of here if you watch Jar Jar Binks. But yeah, for me, like Goodfellas was definitely the introduction. And then I remember distinctly where I first became aware of Scorsese specifically as a person was in high school. We would watch not the whole thing because this is a very long sort of series of documentaries, but the A Personal Journey with Martin Scorsese through American movies that he made in like the mid-90s.
Oh yeah, that was good.
My TV production teacher would show me like several clips about just like him explaining like, oh, here's this one classic film you might not have heard of, or here's a classic film that like we're studying at that time, and him talking about it a bit. And that's where I first became aware of him as sort of the lovable, impish film persona that he is, and especially about how much he loves the idea of film preservation, which I think he was the first guy to like really make me aware of the idea that film historians want to preserve these films and like the National Film Registry and stuff like that, which nothing else, like beyond his great film craft, I really appreciate his love for the idea of like preserving older cinema, keeping us aware of what it once was so that we can be, continue to have it in the future. Future filmmakers can see these movies to some point. I really respect that part of his devotion to the medium as well.
No, absolutely. And I think I'm right along there with you that was the first time that I really became aware of any kind of movement like that to save, old celluloid and things like that. And, maybe get it in the Library of Congress or wherever they want to get it. I absolutely do think it was probably the same documentary series too. And yeah, I mean, he infinitely has my respect, like you just said, not only for being one of the greatest directors of my generation, or since I've been alive, or however you want to call it, but for his love and respect of the medium as a whole. Maybe not so much current trends.
What are you talking about? He loves Captain America. He's a big fan of all these Disney Marvel movies.
Yep,
he's a big Disney Plus subscriber.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. But yeah, his general love and respect for the medium as a whole is also incredibly endearing. Just like his big old silly eyebrows.
Them eyebrows, yeah.
Yep.
And also that he has a love for, like, especially encouraging modern filmmakers today. Like, he's also a big producer of a lot of, like, films that come out from, like, smaller filmmakers. Like The Souvenir recently that came out this year, which I believe stars Tilda Swinton's daughter. Yeah. And then he's a producer of Uncut Gems, the Safdie brothers movie and stuff like that that's coming out this year, too. So he also likes to, like, give a guiding hand to these young tykes that are coming in. So it's infinite respect. Like, he's a guy that not only loves making movies, but appreciates the craft in general. Well, I guess we should actually just get to the two movies we're supposed to be talking about here, Adam, because we're interestingly talking about two much more recent Scorsese movies in the history of his career, given he started in, like, 1967 was his first movie. So we're covering more of, like, the last 20 years in terms of his filmography with our good film that you picked, which was Gangs of New York. And then the bad film that I picked, which was Shutter Island. So 2002, 2010. Fairly recent. Part of the DiCaprio era.
Yes. Isn't Gangs the first one?
Yeah, yes, it is the first DiCaprio Scorsese joint, as we'll discuss right now. Let's get into it. Gangs of New York.
Americans are boarding.
I don't see no Americans. I see trespassers.
A man who will fight for freedom.
There's more of us coming off these ships every day.
A man who will kill for power.
Each of the 5 points is a finger. When I close my hand, it becomes a fist. Bricks, bats, axes, knives, pistols? No, pistols. Good boy.
So, Gangs of New York came out December 20th, 2002. As directed by Martin Scorsese, and was written by Jay Cox, Steve Zalian, and Kenneth Lonergan, based on The Gangs of New York by Herbert Ashbury, which was a very old book from, 1920. That's sort of about this specific era of New York that not a lot of people talk about. It's not depicted in a lot of films. About 100 or so years after we obviously discovered America, but not too long into us having New York as a state, and sort of the rivalry between Native Americans in the terms of, white people who came over with settlers that were native to New York versus a lot of the Irish and other immigrants that came in, especially black people, of course. This movie gets into that a lot with those groups. And Scorsese was trying to make this movie for several decades because he read this book in 1970 when he first started making movies and was like, oh, wow, we should totally make a movie out of this because there's certain areas in New York where he grew up, obviously, where it was still very similar to this. A lot of the structural stuff was still there. And he really wanted to depict sort of this particular era, but he didn't get to do it until 2002, once he got enough clout. And because sort of that status of it being a big passion project, I think it kind of disappointed a lot of people at the time, and it was kind of dismissed as one of the lesser Scorsese fares. But Adam, you picked it as a good pick, so I want to know why this one in particular.
Well, for one, I absolutely love the setting. I love the costuming. I love everything. I love the look of the movie, the score, everything. I mean, I just think it's a really artistically almost perfectly executed film. But the main reason I picked this one is because it is one of the oft thought of lesser Scorsese movies. Also, Daniel Day-Lewis, though. Jesus Christ. It's one of my favorite performances in a movie, period. So that was really one of my main reasons for picking it. I'll be honest. It was a very selfish reason.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I watched this not too long after There Will Be Blood, because that was my first real exposure to Daniel Day-Lewis, and I was like, oh my god, this guy is amazing. I need to see more movies that he's in. And I thought, oh, he's in a Scorsese movie I've never seen before, and I really loved it around that time. This is the first time I've seen it since, so it's probably been now about 10 or 12 years since I'd seen it originally, and it's very ambitious. I really appreciate a lot of elements of it. I do agree Day-Lewis is phenomenal. But the thing I kept thinking of, especially watching this, it reminded me of another Scorsese project, Boardwalk Empire, in terms of sort of a lot of the thematics and a lot of the sort of juggling of characters. But also, I just kept thinking throughout watching it this time, this would work so much better as a TV show.
I mean, you're probably right. Like I said, there's just something about this movie that I absolutely love, but maybe that's it. I mean, there's such a great look to it and core idea there. I can agree. It's a little sluggish for a 3-hour sit.
It's actually quite the opposite reason why I'm saying this, because sluggish would imply that none of this stuff is interesting to me and I feel the length all the time. It's not that, as opposed to I feel like this should be longer because it feels like we're really either holding on too long for certain bits or really rushing. I think the last half of this movie is so rushed about oh, and by the way, we're having an election, and then also we're having these giant riots, and then there's all those other people that are being it goes by so quick in a way that I'm I can't process all of this. This is so much you're throwing at me in the last half of this movie. I kind of just kept feeling I really want to stay more with sort of these character relationships and kind of be more engaged with most of the people who aren't Daniel Day-Lewis. And it's not a slight against most people who are all trying, but it is kind of a slight against sort of the casting, I think particularly. A lot of people said this at the time, and I honestly think it's true. I think DiCaprio and particularly Cameron Diaz are very miscast in this movie.
Oh, Cameron Diaz is pretty terrible. Yeah. No, she is 100% miscast in this movie. I don't know that DiCaprio is... That's a rough one, because is he miscast? No, I don't think so. I think he brings, he can bring a certain gravitas and intensity to almost anything he plays, and this role definitely called for that. But his fucking accent, it's so hard on the ears.
And especially because, he does all the narration, which apparently was, a big note where this had a lot of infighting between Scorsese and producer Harvey Weinstein. A lovely figure we all still love and have no kind of animosity toward whatsoever. But he was apparently a big proponent of no, you gotta cut this up a lot more, you gotta have the narration, which the narration was apparently not something Scorsese originally wanted. And that's where I really think it's okay, this being as like truncated as it is, they had to put in the narration to like really get you to like caught up to speed, and the added factor of like him having the best accent kind of just makes it all the more insufferable.
And it's a really fucking bad accent. I mean, it's really bad. It reminds me of like when Conan O'Brien does his like fake Drake from Ireland accent.
Hoity-toity, Fates and McGuire.
Yeah. Fight me! Hey! It's really bad, and hers is no better. Cameron Diaz can't carry a movie. You know what she reminds me of? She almost reminds me even like Heather Graham in From Hell.
Oh, wow.
You know, From Hell is not a good movie. But, I mean, literally, to me, they're almost on the same level of performance. They completely feel out of place. They both have terrible Irish accents. They both have obviously fake red hair. It's just, I don't care.
I think the thing is with the both of them, I do agree, like, say, like, a DiCaprio adds a certain gravitas, but the problem is it's not a gravitas that fits this particular era, I don't think. Because DiCaprio, I can believe from, like, around the era of, like, a Titanic forward. So, like, 1910s era. Like, I can believe him as, like, even in that particular period, even though he feels like a very modern actor. But in the case of, like, this particular era, that they're, like, every time I see Cameron Diaz and him alone, I keep waiting for them to say, did you fix the time machine? Can we, like, go back now? It feels...
So you're getting a Pacino Revolution vibe.
Well, they at least try. The problem is Pacino isn't trying.
Yeah, Pacino definitely has an accent, though.
Good lord, he does.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you. They do definitely feel kind of out of place, out of time. I had read somewhere, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I think like Ewan McGregor was even in talks to be the DiCaprio part, and I thought,
Lord, that would be so much better.
way better, especially like at that era. The whole problem with the story mode too, the story mode, Jesus Christ, like it's a video game. Well, the story mode.
There are certain cutscenes I wanted to skip in this movie for sure.
It's kind of a cliche sort of motive, you know, want to seek revenge on the man who killed your father. And
become like his protege and all his other stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not against that in theory, but I also feel like that relationship as a result of how big and expansive this story is feels very truncated. Like, I don't quite believe that Daniel Day-Lewis at a certain point is just like, you're like a son to me. I really love you so much. He's like, do you? Yeah, how long have you known this guy? It feels like he's only been here like a week.
Brendan Gleeson, though.
Oh, no, like, that's the thing is, I think a lot of the supporting cast, like, really works for that period. Like, him, obviously Day-Lewis, who we'll talk about more, but even, like, John C. Reilly, I think, really fits in that period.
Neeson works.
I will say, like, the opening bit, I think, is where the movie hits, like, a perfect zenith, and almost it keeps trying to get back to that level and never quite does. I think the opening of this movie is pretty perfect. Like, that whole flashback scene, seeing everybody kind of, like, walk up into, like, about to have that battle, and then him facing off against Day-Lewis and the actual blood and carnage. Honestly, the only part I don't like about that opening bit is that weird Peter Gabriel song.
What is the point of that?
I don't know, because, like, during the big carnage, it's, like, this weird guitar, and then when Liam Neeson dies, we get bagpipes, and then the Howard Shore score comes back in as he's dying.
And they do that weird choppy slow-mo, which I fucking hate. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Especially considering at the same time you could have been seeing Two Towers, which had like one of the best battle sequences of all time that didn't do that choppy slow-mo shit that much.
Yeah, exactly. But no, the opening scene is fucking badass. No, the thing is, I do still really like this movie, but I could definitely see its flaws, and I definitely know why at the time it wasn't as well received. Like, obviously, you said this came out in 2002?
Yes, December 20th, 2002.
Well, so I was like 19 when this came out. I mean, it was right up my alley. It's bloody, it's, violent, great acting, the Irish heritage, all that stuff. It's really there. So I've always had a soft spot for it. I watched it a couple years ago. I'm like, I can kind of see the cracks in it. But man, that's the fucking Daniel Day-Lewis, though. And then watching it for this, I'm like, yeah, Daniel Day-Lewis. That's a pretty set. And,
you might have come to the dark side of that.
Yeah.
I would say though, not just with Day-Lewis, but also with just the clear ambition here makes me definitely still at least appreciate and respect this movie a lot for the fact of the whole 5 points set that they built. That is an actual almost mile of set built in Rome, Italy in a studio, and it looks gorgeously filthy.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic.
That's a big thing I really appreciate about the movie is it does not shy away from the filth, and it does really sort of revel in it. in that way, where you see people just, like, going around covered in mud, or just, like, dying horribly, and, like, having their blood mixed with mud and shit like that. Apologies for my, maybe inaccurate history. This is going on right around the same time as, like, the Old West is, like, not thriving, but kind of, like, almost on its way out, right? On the opposite coast. Yeah. So it's pretty much, this is like the Eastern equivalent of a Western at the time, which is like, I really appreciate just, that's something we just don't get in terms of like historical depictions especially, and it's so interesting to see it from this perspective and see this fully realized world all around these people, and even just like, you get the sense of like, oh, here's John C. Reilly coming in, and he's showing these people a tour, but it's a whole thing of like trying to show kind of a respect, even like with Daniel Day-Lewis, how he has a sort of respect for Liam Neeson, even though he kills him at the same time. There's so many other people, like we mentioned Boardwalk Empire, Stephen Graham, who would later play Al Capone on that show, popping up here as like in a very similar sort of role for like that particular part. I really just like love a lot of the set dressing and these other sort of supporting character actors that are really immersing you in that, which makes, I think, Cameron Diaz and DiCaprio stand out more.
No, and honestly, if he could have nailed the accent a little bit better, I think he would have been a little bit more tolerable. Because he is still DiCaprio. I mean, he's still the fucking guy who can really, really act. Modern actor or not, it's just that fucking terrible accent that he still can't do accents. You just spend too much of the 3-hour runtime with the two of them. So you're like, okay, it gets meandering at times.
Right, especially when they share so many scenes with Day-Lewis.
I mean, he's just fucking chewing every bit of scenery he's in, even when he's not saying a word. Just by his posture and everything else.
To the point where he's chewing so much scenery, you can see nibble marks on Diaz and DiCaprio.
Yeah.
Clearly between takes, he was just getting nibbled.
I'm an American born. Take a bite.
I'm sorry, I thought you was cardboard.
Whoopsie daisy.
Whoopsie daisy. That's so great. Okay, we gotta talk about. All right, I want you to go ahead and just start talking about Day-Lewis. Just go off on like what you love so much about this performance, because it is admittingly phenomenal.
Let's put it this way: one of my favorite movies is Last of the Mohicans, which Daniel Day-Lewis in Last of the Mohicans is fucking phenomenal. He's gorgeous and long-haired and just can speak the language and steely-eyed, and he's the hero, and you're like, oh yeah, this guy looks like the fucking hero. Then you go to this movie, and he's hunched. He's got that horrible, matted down, greasy hair, this giant fucking handlebar mustache, the eye with the glass eye that's an American eagle, which is so cool, by the way. All the scars, and his wardrobe with the fucking top hat, and just the way he carries himself in the whole fucking thing, where he's the most dangerous man there because he's a believer. He believes in this fucking idea of his that, the Native Americans, which is so fucking just wild that he even calls it that because it's so far from the truth, but that they should run everything, and that, the blacks and the Irish and the Chinese and all that have no place in his America and his New York. And he'll violently and horribly defend that idea, and he's constant crave for power, and the way he manipulates everyone. Never once did I look at this performance and go, oh, that's the guy who played Hawkeye. Never. He completely disappears into this role, like he does most every role he's in. He's fucking terrifying, but he's so charming at the same time. I can't. It's one of those that when I first saw it, I'm like, oh God, this is why he's fucking, when people talk about him, they're like, oh yeah, but Daniel Day-Lewis, shit. Like modern actors now, even some of the greats will talk about Daniel Day-Lewis, who some of them are even older than him, with such great respect and admiration because he's that fucking good. And like I said, watch My Left Foot, Last Mohicans, and Gangs of New York, and tell me that's the same guy.
But no, I completely agree about him in particular. He's really the glue that keeps the movie together, which is kind of a problem when it's not, say, your main character in the movie necessarily, when it's a prominent supporting player. But I do agree that he's worth watching the movie for, especially considering watching it this time. I noticed a lot more sort of like his Djangoism was a lot more interesting, considering like certain modern arguments from quote unquote natives of our country, and about immigrants especially. I found that a lot more interesting. It's just like, oh, this is kind of cycling from a lot of old past sins that we kind of breed to this day, and that's something obviously Scorsese is kind of going for. I do also love the irony of how much he hates Lincoln, given about 10 years later he would play Lincoln.
And also expertly play Lincoln.
Oh, of course, yes, but even the bit where, like, he throws the knife at the Lincoln poster. Just like, that's pretty interesting.
Terminology he would use. I mean, even that scene. Yeah, go ahead, go off to war, die for your Blackie brothers. And you're like, Jesus Christ, man, this fucking guy is walking up to anyone in this town, be it the mayor, the sheriff, whatever, does not give a fuck, dude. He owns the 5 points without question.
And I do agree also that, like, especially the accent, which apparently is like this sort of lost American accent that exists around this time. That only exists now in the way that, like, they were able to find any examples of through, like, political cartoons, like, parodying it, and also just, like, sort of direct transcriptions from people who spoke this particular way. I just love also that is, like, thriving in his voice. It's this weird sort of, like, combination of a Brooklyn accent and an English accent kind of melding together in this weird way. But yeah, you just, like, have so much tension for any time that he's around any of these other characters, like, especially the sort of the knife-throwing scene with Cameron Diaz and the whoopsie-daisy thing, which is great, where he's a fully realized sort of, like, almost cartoonish character. Like, technically, if you, like, drew him out, he would look like a Tim Burton sketch of, like, a human with the giant top hat and shit.
Yeah, real lanky and like one fucked up eye. Yeah, totally. Or even like a Leica movie. like the box trolls or something.
That's true. Like, you stepped out of the box trolls.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, yes. But at the same time, he just carries this menace that you wouldn't really quite expect from a guy of that particular stature. Like, when he confronts Brendan Gleeson, who's just trying to be like, oh, we're going to solve this the democratic way. We're going to speak eye to eye with each other. And he just fucking hacks him with that goddamn meat cleaver. It really just, like, it shows that, like, you can't underestimate somebody who might look, like, lanky or frail or anything like that.
No, like, even when he gets shot, just the guttural, like, anger yell afterwards, and when he does the guy who shot him. I mean, like I said, he's skinny, he's lanky, he's older now, he's gross looking, like, he's just kind of looks feeble, but there's no question he's the most dangerous man there, and he's absolutely terrifying. Like I said, he's intimidating as fuck. And thank God Bill the Butcher's not the lead character of the movie. Could you imagine how terrifying this movie would be?
No, I do agree with that, but also at the same time, I would love if either DiCaprio was a stronger character, or maybe, I don't know, you gave him more of a voice to some of these minorities who he's butchering to a certain degree.
I definitely agree.
Yeah, because, like, that's also a big thing watching this, which is, like, the only sort of prominent black character you have at all is Lewis Gilbert, who is very much like quite frankly, a token black person in this movie, where, like, Henry Thomas and DiCaprio are just like, yeah, we're gonna really speak up for you black people, right? He's like, yeah, you are.
Yeah, no, he literally just stands in the background and goes, several times.
Which I get, it's also an issue of, like, you have so many characters, but also that's another reason why I think this would work so well as a TV show, is that you could also have, that's a whole sort of subplot sect of this part that you don't get to in the movie, that I'd love to see on, like, an expanded television show. It could almost be like the older equivalent of, like, Michael K. Williams' character on Boardwalk Empire, which is my favorite part of that show. He's so fucking great on that show.
I believe you. I've never seen an episode.
To be fair, that's one of the more underseen shows. You can also see a lot of the influence there, because he was not only did he direct the pilot, but he was, like, a big producer on the show throughout, and you can see the influence there. Like, I would definitely recommend that show, if nothing else, for Bobby Cannavale plays a very Bill the Butcher type character in season 3.
Bobby Cannavale.
Oh, he's so fucking good. That was where I discovered how great an actor he was in that season 3.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh my god, you're so amazing. I'll follow you to hell and back. And he's in The Irishman now. He's one of, like, several different people. Yeah, like, to be fair,
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like if you're Italian and or Italian looking, so Italian light, you're going to be in the new Scorsese movie, it seems. Like, everybody's in that fucking movie.
That's true, even like a Ray Romano.
It's Ray Romano. Yeah, Martin, don't go over there.
Ray, you're not playing a woolly mammoth this time. That's not what you're doing.
Is it lunchtime yet? I got Metamucil. I'm getting older.
That's the perfect Muppet impression of Ray Romano.
Because he is a fucking Muppet.
I mean, basically, that's
basically. But it's just, this movie has so much, I guess that's the reason I like it so much. There's so much potential here. And the stuff that is done well is done expertly. Like you said, the fucking set design, the costuming, the supporting cast pretty much all around is fucking great. The opening is really awesome, other than Peter Gabriel song and choppy song.
Yeah, and also I would say in terms of Scorsese as our subject, the craft in certain shots, where especially whenever you go around the 5 points, like I always call the shots when early on you sort of get a feel for the geography of a place, even in non-Scorsese movies, I call that the Scorsese shot, because he does such a great job of like really immersing you in like, all right, here's the 5 points, here are some of these gangs, here's this particular area that's like the barber shop, here's this area that the mayor lives in, here's where the butcher's like main area is, and all those other places. Like you get a real sense of the geography of the place, so that when shit ends up going down later, you get a sense of like that this location, to use a cliche, is a character in the movie.
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, that's a good way to put it too. It is a Scorsese style thing. He's he's known for his shots that some of the ones he can pull off, especially to open up sort of the world of the movie. You know, I mean, I've heard even him like putting cameras inside wheel wells on cars and stuff just to get a certain angle and things like that. I mean, the guy is just a master of finding the shot and finding the angle and making something which, you know, maybe other directors less, I don't want to say less skilled, but maybe who don't have the same eye as him, or however you want to put it, taking a shot that they would just give you a crane shot, or, you know, a quick dolly or whatever, taking something that in theory should be a simple, you know, get it done sort of shot, and making it breathtaking and really opening up the film.
Or especially, like, what my favorite sort of sequence in this whole movie is the whole bit where they're doing the elections, and they have everybody, like, going to vote and having them shave their mustaches and shit and go back and vote. And especially, like, we haven't talked about him, but fucking Broadbent. Jim Broadbent is so fun as, like, the crowd mayor.
He's so good in this. He's almost unrecognizable, too.
Yeah, he really immerses himself in that accent as well. And then especially his whole thing about, like, elections aren't made by the votes, they're made by the counters. Keep counting. Like, I love that bit.
Yeah, he's Tammany, right?
Yes.
Yeah. He's, like I said, he's almost unrecognizable with the beard and the darker hair and everything. But yeah, Jim Broadbent is so good in this. Unfortunately, Jim Broadbent, for me now, which sucks, but he's always going to be Nick Frost's dad in Hot Fuzz now for me.
No, that's not unfortunate at all. That's a phenomenal performance, one of the best in cinematic history.
It's so good. He had a great big bushy beard.
Exactly. He would watch this movie and say, like, that guy's got a great big bushy beard.
Yeah. Let's just say we won't be shy of Chunky Monkey for the next month. No, he's like you've said already. I mean, the supporting cast in this movie is phenomenal. Everyone's on their A game. And I do believe that DiCaprio and Diaz are trying. I don't think she's at the skill level, and I don't think he's got the style. He's got the skill, but like you said, he's completely out of place.
You got the heart and the soul, but you don't have the talent.
Right.
To quote South Park. But, you know, Adam, those sound like some final thoughts, so why don't you go ahead and spin off any last thoughts you have on Gangs of New York?
As far as everything we've talked about, all tie points are some of the, you know, best examples of each thing. It's not the worst movie. It's not Scorsese's worst movie, I don't personally think. But it is 3 hours long. It is narrated with a horrible Irish accent, and Cameron Diaz is in it. So if you can get past those things, I think there's a lot here that's worth a watch, especially, you know, Daniel Day-Lewis, though. He's in my top 5 favorite villain performances of all time because of this movie. So I think it's worth it for a lot. Or if you're not a Scorsese completionist, you don't really give a fuck about Daniel Day-Lewis, I mean, you're not gonna miss anything if you skip it either.
As for me, it's definitely gone down with this watch. For me, I would say it is one of like the lower rung Scorsese movies. It's not the worst. I would actually say I watched earlier today, as we're recording this, his first film, Who's That Knocking at My Door, which I would say is a curious experiment more than a movie. So I would say that's maybe like his worst movie technically, but that's still worth watching even for, it's covering some interesting sort of toxic masculinity aspects, even like 67, and it's the introduction of Harvey Keitel, and he's a little baby.
Yeah, and it's Scorsese's first movie, so I mean...
Yeah, and it's currently on Netflix as we're recording and putting this out here. Yes, it is on Netflix now if you're curious to see it. But I will say, with Gangs of New York, still the fact that this is a lower-tier Scorsese movie is saying a lot about Scorsese's career. That the guy always has been quite ambitious, even when he was younger. The fact that he wanted to make this at such a young age proves that he always had like a big, starry-eyed ambition. I think in this case it might have been a bit more than he could chew, to a certain extent, but you can't deny Day-Lewis and the production design and the art design and all this other stuff. If nothing else, I think it's a real testament to, like, I would love to see somebody take this and turn it into a TV series. Maybe the Peaky Blinders guys, I think, could do a really good job with it. Sort of like, right, have Scorsese be involved as a producer, maybe have him direct the pilot, kind of like a Boardwalk Empire. Just, I think you could do a lot with this premise. It's not a complete waste by any stretch. It's definitely got so much running through it that I would say, especially if you really like Scorsese, it's important to watch this even if it is one of his lesser movies, just to show even that lower tier Scorsese, he is trying for so much and delivering, I'd say, at a 60-40 rate with this.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And now, before we get to our next movie, let's go ahead and spotlight an ESO show that you could listen to and queue up right after our podcast.
We are the Cigar Nerds, bringing nerdy sophistication and geeky indulgence on all topics, including movies, video games, science, and pop culture news, all from the Nerd Cave Cigar Lounge. Find us on iTunes, Stitchers, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are found, including ESONetwork.com and CigarNerdPodcast.com. So fire up a cigar, it's time to get nerdy.
All right, and now let's go ahead and get into our second feature, the one we advertise as our bad feature here. It is Shutter Island.
Give you a briefing about the institution?
All I know is it's a mental hospital
for the criminally insane. So this prisoner escapes in the last 24 hours.
It's as if she evaporated straight through the walls.
I've built something valuable here. I'm not going to give up without a fight.
Let me see your face. Let me see your damn face now! Don't move, don't move!
So Shutter Island came out February 19th, 2010, as directed by Scorsese, written by Leda Cologrigis, based on the book Shutter Island by Dennis Lehane. And I remember distinctly the reason why I picked this was because I saw this in the theater. At the time, it was the most profitable worldwide Martin Scorsese movie that has been surpassed since. Do you know by which movie, Adam?
Most profitable Scorsese movie since?
Well, it's overall in his career, too.
Well, hell. I don't know, man. The Stones one?
Wolf of Wall Street.
Oh, of course. Of course. That was a big fucking movie.
Yeah. But this one is nothing to slight at with $295 million as its gross. And I remember seeing this in the theater because, as you guys will have heard by that trailer clip I put in here, this movie was advertised very much as a horror movie, which Scorsese hadn't done before, really. The closest you could probably say is like a Cape Fear, which kind of feels like a bit more horror-driven, but it's arguably a thriller at the same time. But he's always kind of dabbled in that to some extent in some of his other movies. And so I went into this with my father, and actually the whole family went to see this because we were like, oh, it's going to be a spooky movie in February when there's not a lot of those. And this movie is not quite a horror movie. It definitely dabbles in a lot of like horror aesthetics. It's more of like a Val Lewton style horror movie, I would argue, in terms of what it's aiming for. And I remember at the time being very disappointed in it based on the trailers, but this was also very important in sort of my history of liking movies, because this was sort of the movie that I ruminated on where I'm like, well, there's a lot of stuff that I like, but is it the fault of the trailer, really? And I just sort of came to the realization that trailers do lie, and that's an ethos I've kept ever since, but I hadn't rewatched this movie since I saw it in the theater, so I still had the somewhat negative perception of it. Then upon rewatching it for this, I still would say it's a lesser Scorsese, but I dig it a lot more this time, I would say. And we'll go into that a bit more, but what are your thoughts on Shutter Island, Adam?
I also remember the trailer, Martin Scorsese makes a horror movie. I'm like, oh.
It was that exact same voiceover. It sounded just like
that. Yeah, it's exactly like that. It's gonna be crazy. It's definitely not a horror movie, but I do remember being kind of blown away by that idea, too. I'm like, oh, what the fuck? Scorsese's doing horror? Because I didn't even realize this was based on a book, I don't think. Because I don't even remember I don't think that was even in like the promotional material that much. based on the novel. I think it was kind of just like Scorsese makes horror. But when I first saw it, I was actually really pleasantly sort of like surprised by it. I actually really dug it the first time I watched it. I love the way this movie looks. I mean, it's fucking just so fucking pretty. And again, the acting in this is pretty top notch too. But then after I saw it and after I really liked it, I took some time to like think about it a little bit. And, I'm like, I don't know if it was that good. I think I'm just like, sort of, I might be a Scorsese fangirl at this point and anything he does. So maybe was it that good? Maybe people are right. Maybe that's why it's not doing critically as well as everyone thought it would and blah, blah, blah. Well, upon the second viewing, I decided that I was right the first time. I really, really dig this movie. I think it's a very, very well done movie. Is it in the weaker canon of Scorsese movies? Yeah, probably. I mean, I wouldn't say it's near the bottom. I'd say it's nice in middle of the road.
And I think a big thing was more so than like a Gangs of New York. I heard a lot of people criticizing this one because of DiCaprio, where it's just like, oh, he looks like he's wearing his father's clothes when he's being the deputy marshal. And I think upon this watch especially, I realized that, like, I think Scorsese knows that, and I think that's sort of part of DiCaprio's performance as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because it feels definitely like he is this guy who, when we first see him, obviously, and we're not introduced to the twist that admittingly is pretty obvious to somebody who watches the first 30 minutes of this movie and has seen any other, like, twisty movie. But like, I wonder what's going to happen here. But at the same time, I think Scorsese's kind of just more leaning into this is in a similar vein of, like, a Taxi Driver or some of his other movies where we're following this main character who is capable of reprehensible, horrible things. But you get to know this character a bit more, not necessarily sympathize with him, but at least see how he operates. And I think that, especially with this movie where it's a bit more sort of, like I mentioned, Val Lewton-y, has a lot more sort of visual language that feels like it's representing a lot of his issues with, like, the dream sequences. Like, usually I decry dream sequences on here, but the dream sequences here do such a phenomenal job of visually representing his own, like, issues with women and his own issues about violence and a lot of his anxiety from PTSD in the war and all this other stuff. I think it's a phenomenal performance from DiCaprio because despite putting on the airs of, like, oh, I'm playing cops and robbers, I'm a duly appointed federal marshal, he's really is childish and to a degree that's, like, unsettling. It's less that he's necessarily maybe a child and more of, like, he's an animal with a gun. To a certain extent, he's dangerous and unhinged in a way that he thinks he has it all together, but really he is tethering and breaking apart at any moment.
Absolutely, and I think with what the twist is, things like his wardrobe and things like obviously the dream sequences and everything just make sense for the character. Like you said, like his wardrobe, it could be the fucking head prison guard's suit that they just let him wear. I mean, who knows? But there's a lot of pathos and a lot of layers to this performance. It's not such a cut and dry sort of thing. It's not, this, if you don't see the twist coming, which, like you said, if you don't, then you've never seen a movie with a twist in it. But if you don't see the twist coming and you think he is this, New England federal marshal and everything, then yeah, he's going to come across like a prick. Or if you only think of the twist, then yeah, he's a sociopath. But upon rewatch, and there's so many little things. It's a really scary sort of performance by him. I really, really like it.
Right, which is something you don't usually think of DiCaprio, especially around this time. Right?
No, absolutely not.
Because he's so much more sort of like a pretty boy. But in really watching this, you just get fully immersed in this. And even if, like, you give him the benefit of the doubt of, like, he's a duly appointed federal marshal at the very beginning of the movie, you do just see so many of these cracks, as you mentioned, like, right at the beginning, he's, like, washing his face, and he's clearly, like, very troubled to some extent. So even right off the bat, you're kind of thrown off of, like, I wonder where he's going here. But as you keep going along, you see certain, like, things and, like, his sort of methods for interviewing, especially when he, like, interviews all the patients, and, like, the whole thing with the pencil. That feels like something that you could only really get if you were around these people for as long as he probably was.
No, absolutely. I think it's a very, very, like I said, nuanced performance. I think it's one of DiCaprio's best, especially in his Scorsese. What the fuck? I think it's what it...
Scorsese is the sauce that my mama used to use.
Me, I forget. I think it's one of DiCaprio's best, especially when it comes to him and Scorsese's collaborations. If not his best, I think it's a really, really gripping performance, which I think is perfectly anchored by a very understated Mark Ruffalo.
Yeah, which this was around the time that like he was starting to get a lot more clout. Like this is not too long before he got his nomination for The Kids Are Alright and stuff like that. So this is around the time he was kind of rising up. He was right before he became Hulk and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he actually got, I love the fact that he got this role by writing a fan letter to Scorsese, just saying like how much he loved fucking Martin Scorsese. Just like, all right, kid, I'll cast you in my picture. Come on, let's go.
And I think an understated Mark Ruffalo is some of the best acting, not modern, but mainstream acting out there. Like this, and especially Foxcatcher.
Yes.
Oh God, he just breaks my heart, Foxcatcher. He's really, really fucking good. And it's also really, really nice to see a just paycheck performance from Ben Kingsley as well.
Yeah, rewatching it this time especially, I've got so much more about Ben Kingsley, because both of them are playing these parts where it's like they want to play into like the role play thing, which admittingly, the sweatiest part of this movie is the whole idea of like, oh, we're playing this most elaborate role play possible, and how
to try to break this guy's psychosis. Yeah,
I mean, like some of the details of that are just like, so how did you get Mark Ruffalo to fall off that fucking cliff and then come back and shit like that? That's where it's a bit stretched. Like, that's a bit much. But the performances really work in terms of like these guys are walking that tightrope between, hey, we're trying to perform these roles, but also we're trying to examine this guy's psychosis and what he's doing. And I really appreciate them from both sides, and especially even like a Ben Kingsley, where he almost comes off so matter of fact. He's just like, oh, I'm sorry. I guess, it's really raining outside. I guess it's not going to come up. That's another thing, too, is like you had to really work on the weather contingency as well to make sure you couldn't get off the island.
Right, no shit. Like you got, whoever your meteorologist is, it's like the greatest meteorologist in the world that he was able to predict this would happen at this specific time.
I just want to see like John Carroll Lynch outside with like a weather like machine. He's just like making it rain this much. He's got like 5 hoses up there, just like making all this go. Another great performance though too from John Carroll Lynch is the main security. There's a lot of great character actor performances here, particularly someone who we've talked about before, Elias Koteas, basically doing a De Niro impression in the best 100%.
Way. He's better looking De Niro Frankenstein.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
I mean, it really is. But he's fucking terrifying.
Yes.
He's so scary. And then Jackie Earle Haley riding that Rorschach voice, but still doing a really good job.
Mm-hmm. Or Ted Levine, very creepy too, as the warden.
Oh, God. Ted Levine is just... He's terrifying.
Well, but it's interesting, too, because, like, you know him as Buffalo Bill, but now he's playing, like, an authority figure, and he's just as creepy. Yeah. Like, that bit where he leans into him and is just like, well, I know you're a violent person, because I'm also a violent person. What's stopping me from chewing out your eyeball? Like, what the
fuck? I know. But, fucking Max von Sydow.
Right, very much playing into sort of the stereotype of the Nazi doctor.
I was going to say, 100%, he's, he's Laurence Olivier from...
Marathon.
What is it? Man, 100%. Yeah. He's just, there's no question. Well, obviously he's not, but if you don't telegraph the twist, like, this guy's fucking evil. Like, there's no question this guy is experimenting on these fucking patients, which, come to find out, actually, they kind of are.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, too, how they kind of do the layers of it, where initially you're introduced to the idea of like, oh no, they're doing like the Nazi experiment thing. Another great turn from both Emily Mortimer and Patricia Clarkson's the 2 different versions of Rachel Zalando, where it's just like, oh yeah, it's introducing, oh, they're doing weird Nazi experiments. Like, this is sort of the genre movie it's edging toward being. And then you find out, oh no, they're experimenting, but in this really weird role-playing way they're doing with fucking Leonardo DiCaprio.
Now, it's very odd. Like, this is the weirdest LARP session ever. Like, this is just wild. You know what I mean?
This is the most elaborate D&D game of all time.
Exactly.
Ben Kingsley rolled a 9. Now he has to pretend that the weather's happening this week.
Haha! You got a negative 10,000 blow to sanity. It's I will say though, one of the scenes that still, like, every time I see it, well, it's what's like DiCaprio crying when he really cries is fucking. He's really good at it. Like, his whole face just just mangles and it gets wet. With the scene with the kids, Jesus Christ, man.
And Michelle Williams, which that was something I remember at the time, sort of thinking like, oh man, this is sort of like a lesser role for Michelle Williams when I first saw it. She's
really good in it.
Well, no, especially upon rewatching it, I realized so many more of the nuances that show up that she has been horribly abused by DiCaprio in the past, and this is the really sad, tragic way she thinks she can like get out of it. Basically, given his violent tendencies and stuff, like they give you a lot of hints that like he is probably not well enough to have like a stable relationship in a family situation like this.
Oh no, and he's clearly cheating on her, and he's like beating her, drink her, and oh no, yeah, he's a total piece of shit. But that being said, not that I don't feel sympathy for her character, but murdering your children is probably not the best way to maybe get out of it.
Well, I don't think the film was pro killing children in that way.
Well, then I completely took the wrong message from this movie.
So, Martin, what'd you want to do with this movie? Killing kids is fun.
Yeah, I just want to show, that sometimes you just got to kill kids. Kids get in the way, and you want to break up with your lover, and you drown some babies.
By the way, have you met my 9-year-old daughter?
Shut up, you.
No, I think what it's definitely saying is just like this felt like the sort of desperate situation that she felt she'd get out of, and then at the same time, his visions of her are this sort of creepy way of saying this is what he sort of assumed her role would be. I think that's the thing. Like that's another thing that came up along with like the Marvel discussion with Scorsese about like also he always has like these lesser roles for women. And I mean that's kind of arguable. I mean we're both dudes here, so it's we might not have the best perspective, but I think he always has sympathy for these female characters. I think especially here, and any of you motherfuckers saying that also need to see like Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, which is a great movie that has a great performance from Ellen Burstyn as a main character.
I mean, Sharon Stone's performance in fucking Casino, for God's sakes,
or Elaine Bracco in
Goodfellas. I don't buy too much in. I think he doesn't have as many meaty roles for females, as far as it's usually always male dominated cast, but I do think that most of the female roles he does have are very, very important and meaty sort of parts. I don't buy too far into he doesn't give female actors a lot to do. I don't think that's true.
No, they tend to be more supporting characters overall if you look at his whole filmography, but they're not unimportant roles, like especially Michelle Williams here, where you get so much of like what DiCaprio thought of her, and versus like when you see the actual thing that happened, and her actual just like desperation trying to get out of the situation and all this other stuff. I think there's so much there, and such a really beautifully tragic role for her as well, and then you really feel it when like he shoots her in the stomach during that flashback and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
They do, and even like as much as say the CG doesn't necessarily work that much when she turns into ash, that whole sequence where like he goes into their house in the like weird dream sequence and everything's like starting to burn on fire and stuff like that. Yeah. That's such a great way of showing off that like he had this idea of domesticity and bliss when really everything was falling apart. He just wasn't cognizant enough to realize it. That's something that he loves doing, is really examining masculinity and how much of that often is just like this sort of ego boost that makes you completely lose track of what's really happening in your life and how it's just crumbling around you when you don't even want to acknowledge it.
No, yeah, it's I don't even know that it's the case that Teddy didn't realize it was happening. I just don't think he really gave a fuck until it was too late. He was too concerned with drinking and screwing around and everything. And it's almost like these nightmares that he's having and everything are, his realization then what was happening and things like that. It's all right. Let's just talk about the accent. I've been trying to tiptoe around it because I spent most of my diatribe on the last movie about the accent. But fucking DiCaprio, can he do a convincing accent, honestly, other than his normal voice? I mean, really?
I'm thinking.
Because no is the answer. I mean, this and the Departed accent is pretty much the same. I'd argue The Departed is probably one of his more well done, but he can't do an accent to save his life. And God bless him for keep trying. But like even The Aviator, what? this is just like just stop making him do accents.
So would you say then that he's the lesser sort of lead? Do you not like him usually in Scorsese movies as a lead?
Well, I really. It's not that I don't like him. I think he is 9/10 great anytime he has to use an accent. It's that the fucking accent almost takes me out of it every time, especially when he's going against other capable actors who are really pulling it off. It just sticks out like a sore thumb. But like, I mean, Wolf of Wall Street, he's fantastic in.
Right, and he's not really doing an accent there. He's,
right.
He's putting more of his energy into like the physical comedy, which is phenomenal in that movie.
Oh, he's phenomenal. No, it's because he's really good in this. He is really, really, really good. Like I said, it's probably my favorite Scorsese DiCaprio performance. If he wasn't so good of an actor, then I couldn't handle it, the bad accent. But he's really good, so I can almost give the accent a pass because everything else he's doing is top notch.
Well, and I think what really works here is the fact that because of his character, that accent becomes so much more of an act, even though it is technically his real accent as the character. It still feels like it's so much more of like him putting on an airs, like especially when he encounters Ben Kingsley during the climax of the movie, and he is confronted with the idea. It's like, oh no, this is all like a ruse and a charade. He's just like, well, how do you explain what happened to my partner? And it's like, oh, you just, honey, no, you don't know. You don't know what's going down. It feels more like it's defense mechanism at that point. It's even breaking down a bit more. He's becoming more and more sort of like a child, realizing that like playtime's over to a certain extent.
Yeah, it's almost like he's played a noir cop.
Yes.
Really amping it up to almost be like a tough guy, to come off like, he's in charge and he's really, not going to take any flack off anybody. But then, he gets put up against, like a Ted Levine or, God bless him, I can't ever remember his name, but the head of the guard.
John Carroll.
These legitimate, like, ball-breaking tough guys. You could almost see him retreat back in himself every time. When he's really intimidated, he sort of amps it up even more when he doesn't know what's going on or he's intimidated.
Or even someone who's more assured of himself, like Patricia Clarkson, who's just like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, that's... I didn't have any kids. I don't have a husband. I'm a doctor here who just got, like, fucking rubbed in the situation. Like, even then, his guard is being let down so much, where he just realizes, like, oh, I wasn't actually aware of the situation at all. It's really just completely deconstructing his fantasy as time goes on, to the point where I love the ending of this movie so much more upon this watch.
Yeah. No, the ending is so well done. To where, I mean, the first time I saw it, like, obviously I understood the twist and everything, but I think maybe I wasn't really paying attention at the very, very end.
Because you're more reeling from the fact of, like, oh man, we thought this twist already. We get it, Ben Kingsley. We know what this is.
Yeah, basically. That I was like, by the time he's sitting there with Mark Ruffalo on the steps and everything, I'm like, all right, well, let's just end the movie. I don't think I picked up the idea that, no, it worked, basically, what they did, but he's going to pretend that he's still crazy so he can just get the lobotomy to forget everything that happened.
Yes, I love that so much, how that's conveyed.
It's just like, so fucked up, man.
Yeah, where it's just like, what's our next move? And then Mark Ruffalo does that great nod over to Ben Kingsley, like, nope, didn't work. And Ben Kingsley just looks for a second and is like, all right, let's keep going. Like, I love that look on his face. And then DiCaprio just says that line about, like, made me realize maybe it's better to die a noble man than live as a monster. And they just,
right.
It's so great. That's such a great final line for this whole movie.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that was probably the best and only satisfying outcome for this movie.
Yeah, and it's a really fucked up, sad, unsettling
it's terrible, but the whole movie really is.
No, it really is. Yeah, it plays on a lot of sort of like these horror sort of tropes, but in a way that feels more distinctive of like, oh, this is this man completely breaking down what he thought he was and realizing who he really is as a person. I really dug that. But that's the weird thing is this double feature is one of the rare times where I rewatch movies I've seen before, and the good feature I felt less about than I did the first time, and the bad feature I feel better about.
Yep.
To the less completely shifted perspectives.
Yeah, I am right on board. I 100% agree with you.
Yeah, and I guess it's just the power of Scorsese's direction. So let's get, I guess, into final thoughts then, Adam. Your final thoughts on Shutter Island.
I think this movie sort of gets an unfair shake. Even like other people I told that these were the movies that we were doing, you know, they think, oh, Shutter Island. And I'm like, wait, I mean, did you even give it a fair chance, or were you just biting into what everybody was saying at the time? Because I'd argue, I mean, it's by no means a bad film at all. I think it's, like I said, the way it's filmed, the color palettes, all of the acting, except for that goddamn accent, but all of the acting and the ending. I mean, it's a really, really well done movie. Is it one of my favorite Scorsese movies? No, but it is by no means his worst either, at all. I think this is a very, very well done movie.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Overall, as I said, this is the Scorsese movie where I really grew to appreciate it more on the second watch. There's still some sweaty kind of stuff with the premise, with the whole role-playing thing. It's just like, okay, it's a bit of a stretch, but at the same time, you're still engaged in what the characters are doing. You're still really following this whole story, and the tragedy of it really sinks in upon the second time when you're not as focused on like, oh, what's the twist going to be? It's pretty obvious, Marty. It's like, no, he knows that. He knows that you know what this twist is going to be, but he's more enticed with just like, well, let's examine why this character would actually be that killer. Like in so many bad twist movies that came out, especially post like Sixth Sense, it's so much more about the reveal, about like, oh my god, it's actually this, and like these small details make sense. But this is really examining like, here is this character and why he is just like sort of been destroyed and disheveled, and like we didn't even talk about, but that whole flashback with the war sequence is so haunting. That's like the most horror-driven element of this movie, is when we see those flashbacks, especially the mountains of frozen people in Dachau.
Oh, no. I know. Ugh.
Like, that's the thing, is it's definitely sort of like, it's Scorsese kind of melding film noir and horror elements to make this interesting character study about a monster of a man who comes to realize he's a monster that he was chasing this whole time. Which is so interesting. It's really engaging. There's a lot of great stuff. There's some stuff like I mentioned, some of the stuff with the setup, or even the use of existing classical music, I think is kind of hit or miss, because sometimes it's a bit overbearing, like when they first enter the Institute, and it's like big boom, 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 boom. Like, okay, calm down. We get it. It's spooky. Martin, we get it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. But there are other times where it's a lot more haunting and ethereal and spooky in a way that I do agree. I think this is one of his more underrated movies in the span of his whole career. Not the most. We'll get to that in feedback. We have some people who point out the most underrated, I would argue. But this one is definitely one that needs to be, I think, re-examined by some people, especially now that it's nearly 10 years old. It deserves to get a reappraisal.
Agreed.
Yes, but that's the end of our discussion of our double feature of Martin Scorsese movies, but not the end of the show, because if you stick around to the very end of the show, we do our picking for next week's episode, and we also have some other stuff to talk about, including feedback, because every Monday at DEDBpod, which is our Facebook and Twitter page, every Monday we put up a feeler about, like, hey, what are your favorite, least favorite things related to whatever topic we're doing for the week, and we asked all of you about Marty Scorsese and his best and worst films. And so we had some people chime in with that. First off, David Snyder, who's at the Impossibulls on Twitter, said best Goodfellas and worst Gangs of New York. James Rodriguez, previous guest, said, my favorite Scorsese films are Black Panther and Doctor Strange. Oh, wait.
Oh, James. You trickster.
Seriously, though, I have a lot of love for Silence, a compelling meditation on faith, and the best film of 2016 where Andrew Garfield played a religious man staring into the face of adversity. I'm also a fan of The King of Comedy, a masterfully played black comedy about the lengths one goes to in achieving fame, with one of Robert De Niro's best performances ever. Casino is also worth mentioning, an engrossing tale which makes every minute of its 3-hour runtime count. Brian Kane says, I feel like After Hours was the progenitor of the modern crazy night comedy, what with how surreal and progressively batshit that movie gets. I'm also glad that The King of Comedy is getting a heap of new attention thanks to Joker. Nothing from him is particularly objectionable to me, though Silence can be a bit of a slog at times. Nick Frazier said, best, that's tough. Everybody's going to say Goodfellas, so I'm going to go with The Departed, even if it's a remake of a Hong Kong film. And worst, New York, New York didn't do much for me. And then Will Torres says, favorite is King of Comedy. Rupert Pupkin is what the character of the Joker truly is, a delusional sociopath that thinks he's hilarious when he's really just an obnoxious asshole that thinks he deserves more for nothing. Not some put down upon poor misfit of society. It's an ahead-of-its-time film that explores the connections that people have with celebrity and fame, that they can admire and love when they feel that connection, and then be resentful and petty once the connection is taken from them. Least, I guess Shark Tale? Why not? But yeah, everybody's been pointing out King of Comedy. I completely agree. That movie is so great and nobody talks about it.
Yeah, it's really, really good.
Like, that's the thing, is Joker is a part of the reason I kind of disliked that movie was because it's so very blatantly being like, hey, look, it's Taxi Driver and King of Comedy. Like, especially King of Comedy. They have De Niro play the fucking talk show host. It's like a wink to King of Comedy that's pretty fucking obvious. If you've never seen that movie, it's so phenomenal. It's De Niro playing this guy who is a down-and-out guy who wants to be a comedian, but he's not that funny, and he lives in his mother's basement. He has a whole fucking setup that's dedicated to, like, paper cutouts of his favorite talk show, where Jerry Lewis is the talk show host. And it's this really engaging, dark satire about fame and celebrity that is, as everybody mentioned, so ahead of its time. It is, like, so predictive, like, modern celebrity culture, down to his sort of criminal actions that go on as the film goes along. That's maybe my second favorite Scorsese movie after Goodfellas.
I haven't seen it I think I've only seen it once, maybe twice, so I definitely want to revisit it, but I remember really, really enjoying it.
I mean, some of these people also mentioned stuff like After Hours is very underrated and is a very fun one. Mm-hmm. It's much more comedy than he would usually do, but it's also very dark and disturbing in its own right. I will say Silence is one of the ones that I respect more than I like necessarily, because it's also very long. That one's, I think, 3.5 hours long.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one. I think that might be one of the only Scorsese movies I haven't seen, other than his first movie, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah, you're like a Boxcar Bertha, I assume. You probably haven't seen either, which I haven't either.
I haven't seen that either. But I haven't seen Silence. It just kind of didn't interest me. But I mean, I'm going to eventually, of course, watch it just when I get around to it. It's not one that I'm dying to see.
Well, and I think that's one also that it was another passion project where he'd been wanting to make that since around the time of, like, Last Temptation of Christ. He was originally going to make the Silence movie, but then the funding fell apart. So we had Last Temptation, which is, admittedly, another one where I don't think many people realize it's a Scorsese movie, but that one's so great. I fucking love
it's great.
Defoe was one of the weirdest casting choices for Jesus, but he fits oddly well.
Well, and that's telling. Yes, absolutely. It's perfect.
Particularly that bit where he just talks about, I used to believe in love. Now I believe in this. He pulls up a fucking axe. It's like, oh god, Jesus has an axe.
I know.
This is so insane. Look, are there any other ones that don't get enough appreciation that you would want to spotlight on him from his filmography?
I mean, I don't really think so. To be honest, I think Mean Streets might get overlooked a little bit. I think Mean Streets is a really fucking good movie. Nobody mentioned Raging Bull. Raging Bull is a fantastic movie. And I also, of course, really, really love The Departed as well. I mean, ranking a bad Scorsese movie is, not the easiest thing to do because they're pretty much all really good for the most part.
Yeah, even those that I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of, I respect to some degree. Like New York was mentioned as a bad one. I do really dig that one, but it is definitely sort of odd in his filmography for sure. It's a bit of a mess. It's kind of in the same vein, I would say, of Gangs of New York in that way. And even Silence also kind of feels that way too, given how much he's passionate about it, but the story doesn't quite come together as well. A really underrated one I would say is Bringing Out the Dead with Nicolas Cage.
That's a really, really good call. That is one that I honestly, I don't think a lot of people realize it is a Scorsese movie, and B, it's just not talked about at all. And that movie is fucking fantastic. That's one of Nicolas Cage's best performances ever, if not his best.
Yes.
It's so good.
Yeah, especially with it's playing so much on the Scorsese thing of, it's kind of like a weird combination of After Hours and Taxi Driver, where it's one giant crazy night, but it's really just the last of many nights where this particular ambulance driver is just like on the edge of complete insanity because of insomnia. And it's such a great turn for Nicolas Cage as well. It's so good, and just one that's not talked about that much at all.
Yeah, and I'm not a huge fan of Hugo either. I get why people like it, and I understand it. It's just not for me.
See, I remember really loving it at the time. I think particularly for that was one where I had no idea about the George Méliès thing that was happening, like in the third act. And I think like the first 2/3 of it are like, oh, it's a cute kids movie, and the last third of it is like, oh, it's a beautiful examination of why people love movies and why people, especially at that time, kind of needed it at the same time. And I think that's one of Ben Kingsley's best performances in recent years too, as Méliès. I think he's so wonderful in that performance, so warm and so tender and so honestly like sort of haunted and regretful at the same time. It's also, I think, one of the better examples of using the 3D, but in a way that fits the story pretty well. I did also see it in the 3D format, so that might have
I did too. Yeah. I agree that the 3D was expertly done. And I do agree about Ben Kingsley as well. But yeah, there's something about it. It just never really landed with me. But I've only seen it the one time. So, I mean, that might be one worth revisiting at some point. Maybe my kid gets a little older. And we talked about Cape Fear, me and you. I think Cape Fear is 3/4 of an excellent movie. I think it sort of slogs at the end, gets a little out there, but I think Nolte and De Niro just turn in fantastic performances in that movie.
Yeah, it doesn't help also that I saw that after seeing the Simpsons Cape Fear episode. Which just completely fucking skewers that movie.
Yeah, it does.
One of the best episodes of that goddamn show. But yeah, so thank you for all that feedback, and we also want to thank some other people here, like Chris Oliver for the intro and outro music used for our show. You can listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com. Thanks to Alice Garda for the art that's used in our show as well, and you can find us on Twitter and Facebook at DEDBpod. That's where we post up those feelers and also just a few other random tidbits and things. And you can also email us at doubleedgedoublebill@gmail.com. Or you can find my own individual Twitter account at Not The Who's Tommy, where I post random things. And I do some writing for both my blog, marianithomas.wordpress.com, and also truesuperherofans.com, where I do satirical superhero news for that last one, and for the other one I do movie reviews and stuff. Right now, as you're listening to this, I will have an early review up of Knives Out, which I saw in an early screening right before this. I haven't seen it yet when we're recording, but I'm sure that review is quite a thing.
It has a lot of words, I can tell you that.
And Adam, what about you? Have some little art stuff that you do, right?
Yeah, it's facebook.com/ghoulishgourds. You know, I just started this year. I was painting, styrofoam pumpkins in any style, pop culture related for the most part that anybody would want, and selling them. But by the time this episode's out, I'll either already started or just about to start doing Christmas bulbs. They'll also, anything pop culture related, I can paint on them and ship them anywhere in the U.S. if you want to commission one, or I'll have some pre-made ones. And if you like one, you can buy one of those too. Everything's for sale. Everything's negotiable. And pretty much anything you want can be done. So you can either shoot me a message right on that page. You can either even shoot our podcast page a message. You can shoot my own personal Facebook message. You can reach out to Thomas or our podcast page on Twitter. Send us an email at doubleedgedoublebill@gmail. I have ghoulishgourds@gmail. So get a hold of me and I'll do something for you.
Yeah, and you'll definitely get a discount of some sort if you say, hey, I heard about this on the show.
I don't know. I was thinking of upcharging.
Oh, you listen to our show? $10 more.
Yeah, I'm going to try a new tactic, see how it works.
Yes, and if you want more upcharging content like this, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, and other podcasting platforms where we're absolutely free. The price is not negotiable because it's free and you don't need to pay anything. And you can also, if you're listening to us on ESO, maybe dig into the archives of our Podbean feed for all the older episodes we didn't get to post on the channel for that. And then also make sure to rate, review, or at least share us around to give the show more visibility.
Yeah, it doesn't take a lot,
guys. Go home and get your review box. Yes. But Now, Adam, it's almost time to end the show, and before we do, we gotta pick our movies for next week. And I mentioned Knives Out earlier, which will be coming out not too long after this episode drops, but we decided we're gonna do a genre we haven't really technically covered before and do mystery films in honor of that whodunit.
Oh, I mean, we've covered mystery films on the show, but no, as a specific topic, no. I mean, you could argue even Shutter Island was a mystery, but
pretty easy to solve mystery.
Well, yeah, if you ever seen a movie. Yeah, never as an actual topic, so this will be interesting. Picking bad mystery movies was kind of difficult, to be honest with you.
Yes, because you had the two bad ones. You've assigned numbers between 1 and 10 for both of those.
Yes.
And I have the two good, and I've assigned numbers between 1 and 10 for both of those as well. And so now we'll each pick numbers between 1 and 10 in order to get closer to whichever one of those numbers we've assigned for the opposite person. And that gets us our good and bad feature for next time. So, Adam, for my two good choices, number between 1 and 10.
I'm not going to pick a number. It's a mystery.
I have to deduce the number.
Yes. I deduce the number 2.
Just as I suspected, Watson. Number 2, yes. And for that, at number 1, actually, a movie I've briefly talked about on the show, but I'm very excited because I think it's a very underrated one, for particularly the lead actor here. It is Sidney Lumet's Death Trap, starring Christopher Reeve and Michael Caine.
God, I don't even know if I've seen the whole movie. So that'll be fun.
It's pretty great. Very excited to talk about it.
What was your other one?
At number 7, I had The Long Goodbye, the Robert Altman film, starring Elliot Gould. Yes.
Yeah, that's a really good movie.
Yes, but now, Adam, well, deduced, based on your nomenclature and based on your particular attitudes, I would deduce number 6.
You've caught me red-handed, and I would have gotten away with it, too. At number 7, I am so sorry, Thomas. Can I just say it right now? If you want to quit after this, you're more than welcome. Holmes and Watson.
Oh, no! Oh, God.
Yeah, buddy.
You monster. We just covered a good John C. Reilly movie.
I know, I'm hitting hard with that one.
Oh, I feel dirty.
At number 1, I had Source Code with Jake Gyllenhaal.
I like Source Code a bit. I think that movie has a trouble of, I think it would be a great movie if it ended 3 minutes earlier than it did.
I kind of agree with you. That last 3 minutes really sort of ruined the whole movie for me. So, Holmes and Watson, my friend.
Well, that's the real Death Trap compared to the good movie.
Have you seen it yet?
I deduced I haven't. I didn't want to.
You're welcome.
Well, we'll get into all of that deduction next time, but until then, do I look like a clown to you? Do I amuse you, Adam?
Where's Karen? Wake up, Karen. I love Ray Liotta so much.
Well, good night, everybody.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping through Amazon.com or the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.